Welcome to In Focus with Ejaz Haider. Our top story tonight is about continuing state violence in Indian-occupied and illegally annexed Kashmir. Violence and state oppression continues in IOJK. On Monday, 2 freedom fighters were martyred and 4 occupation forces personnel killed in a long encounter. In July, 3 contract laborers were killed in cold blood by the Indian occupation forces, declaring them to be militants. Subsequent investigations have revealed that the 3 young boys had gone to Shopian in search of work. The Indian occupation forces now say a court of inquiry has been ordered into the incident. This, according to Kashmiri activists as well as Human Rights Watch, is a sham. An HRW statement makes clear that any army investigation into the recent killings will be meaningless. The Armed Forces Special Powers Act gives Indian occupation forces effective immunity from prosecution for serious human rights abuses. It grants the military wide powers to arrest, shoot to kill, and occupy and destroy property in counterinsurgency operations. Observers point to the infamous Machal fake encounter. 5 personnel from the Indian occupation forces were suspended by the Armed Forces Tribunal in 2017, although they had been convicted by an army court-martial in 2014. Reports by even Indian think tanks like the Observer Research Foundation concede that New Delhi's August 5th action has deeply alienated the Kashmiris and the situation is unsustainable. To discuss this further, we are joined by Gowhar Gilani, who is a journalist and author. Joins us from Srinagar. Iftikhar Gilani, again a journalist and author from Kashmir, who joins us from Ankara. A court of inquiry for the Shopian encounter. What credibility, Gowhar Gilani, is there for these courts of inquiry? Because there is a long trajectory of a very glaring fact that no occupation personnel have ever, and I repeat, ever been punished for their oppressive tactics and excesses.
Well, Mr. Haider, thank you for having me in your show. As you rightly, in your introduction said that there have been several instances. This Shupanya alleged fake encounter is not the first one. There are which are in public memory. There are encounters like Pathribal fake encounter and another Matsil, which was, very recently. Pathribal is of March 2000. So, and besides that, there have been other, encounters and gunfights in which human rights organizations have alleged that they have been fake. But as far as these, inquiries and probes, there is very little faith in the institutions as far as the Kashmir story is concerned. As of today, I would tell you that even a pro-India political party like the People's Democratic Party has alleged that the institution of J&K police is acting as a shakha of a particular political ideology. I don't want to mention that political ideology. You understand what I mean. And the suppression suppression is so much that not only the journalists are hounded, not only the politicians, the pulpit, and people, as well as the masjid, Maulvi, and media. Everybody is silenced. And there was a group on Twitter which is known as Kashmir Twitter, K Twitter. All of them have been called to the police stations, cyber police stations, and mobile phones have been confiscated. So in such an atmosphere where a pro-India political party, unionists are alleging that state institutions are behaving like a shakha of a particular political ideology, how can probes be conducted in a fair and free manner? And strangely, today we saw in some newspapers that the army had issued advertisements in local newspapers saying that people should come forward with testimonies with regards to the gunfight in Shopaya. But there are already testimonies available. The families in Rajouri, all the 3 families are saying and insisting that these were laborers and they had gone to Shupanya to find jobs on the insistence of their cousins who were already working in Shupanya. And many people, locals in Shupanya, have also already said the encounter looked like very fake and bizarre, and the circumstances in which this gunfight was conducted. There are lots of question marks raised by even the institutions in Delhi. So just to repeat the same exercise and same dose of probes it's like a filthy wardrobe where you will not find any new clothes, because the record is such that there's little faith in institutions to deliver justice as far as Kashmir is concerned.
Absolutely. Stay with me, Gaur Gilani. I'm going to get back to you, but let me pull in Iftikhar Gilani here. Mr. Gilani, I have this report, this Wire Urdu report in front of me, which has been written by you, and it is dated 18th August. And its title is कश्मीरियों को जान लेना चाहिए कि अब वो हमारे गुलाम हैं. Translated, it means Kashmiris should understand that they are now our slaves. Give us a sense of why you have titled this report like this, and is this a quote? Did someone say this?
Can I first just add to what Gowhar has said, having covered Kashmir now for last 26 years and even more, and observed it from even the New Delhi. I can go on and on the cases where the investigations have been stalled and investigation were actually. I can mention just two cases. There were just two cases, right, from 30 years, where investigation had reached to the point where those people responsible for killings could have been prosecuted. One was this Brakpura, is mentioned after the Patribal. If you remember that in the aftermath of killing of 6 in Chhattisgarh, that those 4 people were killed in an encounter, and after that encounter, there was again and their relatives were marching towards the police, marching toward a district administration office, and then further 9 people were killed. And on that, there was the government of Jammu and Kashmir instituted 2 commissions of inquiry. One was the Justice Kuche Commission, another was the Justice Pandian Commission. And Justice Pandian Commission was one such commission which worked quite very hard, and gathered evidence. And both these commissions, they inducted some CRPF officers, and they inducted a local who was the SSP at that time, and the person who had actually picked up those 4 people and handed over them to army, and they were killed. And again on this Bagpora, the person who had actually ordered the firing and killed the other 9 people. The person right now is the advisor of the Jammu and Kashmir government. What can you expect? What justice we can expect right now? And another case was in the case of the killing of the noted and a very famous advocate Jalil Andrabi.
Yes.
And since he was a very famous and a noted advocate, Jammu and Kashmir High Court and the High Court took quite very serious, and they gave the case was given to the CBI, and it was quite followed by the judiciary was following this case, and ultimately they got the person who was responsible for his killing. His name was Major Avtar Singh, and the Jammu and Kashmir police went to when the summons were issued to the army to hand over this Major Avtar Singh to the police. Army first said we don't know where he is. Then the Jammu and Kashmir police traced him to a military camp in Jalandhar or Ludhiana, I remember, and went to arrest him, though that police party was actually detained in the camp, beaten, and they returned and complained to the court what had happened to them. Again, the summons were issued to the army, and in between that, this Major Avtar Singh vanished. Nobody knew where he is. And it was after I think almost a decade, more than a decade, a person in America had beaten his wife, and his wife had in California. His wife had complained to the local police, and then the local police arrested this man. His fingerprints, the person is Major Avtar Singh. The person had been given a passport. He was told he was actually told to escape from the country. He went to Canada, and from Canada he had gone to US. And then it was normally now it was a Central Bureau of Investigation should have asked the Interpol, asked the United States government to hand it over this person because the case was going on. It was not done. It was then after 1 year or so, the person committed suicide because he had alleged that if I am deported to India, I will reveal so many things.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but Major Avtar Singh, who ultimately committed suicide, Uh, but before that, he killed all his family also. I think there was one child who got saved or something, but he killed his entire family and then he committed suicide. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yes, exactly, you're correct. And you can see that it was after almost 2 decades. Nobody had even actually, there was no actually made any effort was made actually to deport him to India and bring him to justice. There are just 2 cases just I was mentioning about. Now about the question which you have asked. It is not actually my quote, or it is not actually my report. It was a report by the Pakistan India People's Forum for Peace and Democracy with the Jammu and Kashmir Solidarity Group.
Oh, sorry, you are reporting about report.
Exactly. They had
Yes.
instituted a commission of inquiry, which went to the Kashmir, and in Pulwama, this businessman who has actually narrated the story, one of the very entrepreneur, whose father was working with the military engineering service of the army. His uncle was working with the Indian Air Force, and this person who has a factory in the industrial estate in Pulwama, he has been quoted by this report that when he was going to this factory just 2-3 months ago, he was asked to, when he was parking his car outside his factory, he was told to come out and do some and was forced to do a labor work by the Rashtriya Rifles. It is not nothing new in Kashmir. We have done it many times. This forced labor. I remember it many times we have done it. Nothing new in Kashmir.
So you were saying that even if you're a journalist or you're someone else, if Rashtriya Rifle or some other occupation forces unit decides that they want you to do something for them, there is no way that you can refuse.
There is no way. We have done it so many times. We have. I can count my own cases where I have done. But this person, actually, it is a change of mindset in the army for the soldiers for the last 1 year. This shows that when he refused, he was told this sentence that gulami karna seekh lo, Kashmiriyon ko ab samajh lena chahiye ki ab gulam hai.
Okay, so you are our slaves. I have to sue there, Iftikhar Gilani, because I'm running out of time. Also, I want to do one round with Gowhar Gilani, but thank you so much. That was Iftikhar Gilani speaking with us. Gowhar Gilani. So this is a situation where Kashmiris are stripped of all dignity and self-respect. And also tell me another thing. We hear on this side that the occupation forces also get really riled up when the Kashmiris raise the Pakistan flag, if Imran Khan is addressing and if someone is watching his address, that he can be hauled over just for doing that. Are these reports correct?
Well, Mr. Ejaz, I just wanted to quickly go back to what Mr. Iftikhar was saying. There was this MLA, member of Legislative Assembly, who fought elections from North Kashmir's Langate area. His name is Engineer Rashid. He's under custody right now with the investigation agency in Delhi. And he has said it on record that even he was many a time taken as a bonded laborer. And this practice of bonded labor is very rampant in those areas which are closer to the line of control. So it's happening in the villages and hamlets everywhere. So this is like from the horse's mouth. And then coming back to your question, specifically answering that, it's not something very new in the last 30 years. If we go back to the recent history, even in the 60s and 70s, anybody who would listen to the radio commentary of cricket on Radio Pakistan or listen to the news of Radio Pakistan. So during Bakshi's regime, for example, those people were arrested and hounded. There was an unofficial army, which was something called a brigade. The Peace Brigade, ironically. So they would go to their homes and see who are the people who are listening to Pakistan news or Pakistani commentary on radio transistors. So those people were also hounded. So this is very correct. It's not only about the Pakistani flag or Pakistani symbols. It's about like the Kashmiri flag, for example. Now it's it's made illegal to hoist a Kashmiri flag. Kashmir had until very recently, until last year, its separate flag, separate constitution. That is also now illegal. So you can only imagine that the kind of suppression and the kind of control on all the narratives.
I can try and imagine, Gilani, but frankly, it's very difficult to actually feel the import of all this unless one is physically in that occupied land. But thank you so much for your views. We shall take a short break and return to discuss an interesting report by National Public Radio on the situation in Afghanistan. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. Our second story tonight is about a report on Tuesday by National Public Radio. NPR is an American privately and publicly funded non-profit media organization based in Washington, D.C. NPR report quotes Afghan Analyst network analysts and says the Afghan government might be delaying talks to wait for the U.S. election results. Other analysts disagree and say that in doing so, the Afghan government risks peace talks collapsing and could be blamed by its main backer, the United States. Several Ghani administration officials also refute the accusation of foot-dragging and say they believe the United States will continue to support the Afghan government throughout negotiations. Intizar Khadim, an official on the Afghan negotiating team, said any delays are largely a matter of logistics. Andrew Watkins, a senior Afghanistan analyst at the International Crisis Group, says, and I quote, "It would be a big mistake for the Afghan government to hope for a significant difference between President Trump and a hypothetical President Biden's desire to withdraw from Afghanistan," unquote. Most observers, however, believe Washington does not have a plan B for Afghanistan in case talks fail. To discuss this further, we are joined by Rahimullah Yusufzai, who is the resident editor of the news and joins us from Peshawar, and Rahim Gul Sarwan, who is a journalist in Kabul. Let me begin by asking Mr. Sarwan, why is this impression being given that the Kabul government is dragging its feet and perhaps waiting for the next U.S. presidential elections?
Well, from the beginning, the deal between the U.S. and the Taliban, that was the worst one, because Afghan government, from the beginning of the process, they were not involved. And the U.S. and Taliban, during the deal, they forced Afghan government to release 5,000 Taliban prisoners without any agreement with the Afghan government. Afghan government didn't had any idea, any suggestions, or any agreement in regards to that. Now the Afghan government should protect the Republican, the achievements, the people, the society, and the society really wants. Because the group that they fight in past 19 years and killed many Afghan civilians and during their suicide attacks, and now the government releasing 5,000 their fighters, and there are the deadliest attackers among these prisoners. And without any gain, any things to achieve, what will the government do now? They should, from the beginning, they should be in this process, and they should be one-sided. Now the Taliban have their firm commitment. Even Afghan government said that U.S. promised the President Ghani, if government release 4,600 Taliban prisoners, there will be intra-Afghan dialogue, the reduction of violence. Right now, there is nothing, no reduction in violence, no intra-Afghan dialogue, and Taliban still are demanding the only one, their demand that 5,000 prisoners. Still, IOJK gave the authority to the president, and now the international community, the France, Australia, even US, they have the blacklisted people in these 5,000 prisoners. So these are all issues that government are struggling for it.
No, okay, I'm just trying to understand this. You've given us a litany of, reasons for why the Afghan government is dragging its feet, but this NPR report talks about Kabul doing so, thinking that perhaps Joe Biden would become the president, and if he does become the president, that perhaps he would have a rethink on negotiating with the Taliban. Do you think that thinking is correct in the manner that some of the analysts have told NPR?
Well, it's a so-so call, we call it, that maybe some analysts give this impression from the President Ghani or Afghan government. Afghan government is definitely looking for any change in U.S. policy, and that's the exact things that they are looking. Because
so hold on. So saying that the Kabul government is definitely looking for a change in the U.S. policy, and that change would obviously be for the U.S. to stop negotiating with the Taliban. Is my impression correct?
No, I would say something else, that Afghan government needs any change in U.S. policies. That is, that it should be like Afghan government should be on the top of these negotiations, not equal or down to in these negotiations. And that's the change that Afghan government is looking for. If it's come under the Trump administration or if it's come under the Joe Biden administration, definitely Afghan government have a lot of authority. Cities are with the Afghan government population. They sacrificed during the 19 years. And right now, giving all these system to a group and bringing the group on the top of the every political system. So this is the thing that every president don't like, Afghan government don't like to see. So they would like to see the U.S. to change the policy in regards to the intra-Afghan dialogue or the peace process, and they should listen to the Afghan government what they really want.
Okay, stay with me, Mr. Khan. Let me take this to Rahimullah Yusufzai. Mr. Yusufzai, the problem with this thinking is that if the United States and its allies, including the Kabul government, if they were actually winning on the ground, they would have no reason to talk to the Taliban. The reason they've had to talk to the Taliban and try and cut a deal is precisely because they have not won. So if this is the thinking in Kabul, I am not sure if the intra-Afghan dialogue scheduled for the end of this month is likely to succeed.
I think the whole idea was that there is no military solution after 19 years of war. And they had to find another way. And another way was to try and hold peace talks. Taliban were willing, but they put certain conditions. One condition was that they will only negotiate with the US and not with the Afghan government. The US was reluctant, and that's why the talks got delayed. Eventually, in 2018, the Americans agreed, and there were 18 months long peace talks. And finally, in February, we had the peace agreement. So this whole process was being conducted with the consultation of the international partners of Afghanistan, the US allies. I think everybody was involved. The idea was to test the Taliban if they are really willing to have peace, and let them first talk to the Americans and make them agree to talk to the Afghan government as well. That was the idea, and effort is made to get those ideas implemented. So I think that, the failure to achieve a military victory led to the peace talks. Now, if that was wrong, and if they don't want to have peace talks, they want to put new conditions, then this could lead to another round of war and eventually maybe another round of peace talks. So I think, what do we want to achieve here? Do we want to achieve a military victory, or do we want to achieve peace? I think that, President Ashraf Ghani, Dr. Abdullah, all of them have spoken clearly about the need to have a peace agreement and peace talks. And they have accepted certain Taliban conditions, and one was the release of Taliban prisoners. It was actually exchange of prisoners. So 1,000 government prisoners have already been released by Taliban. And the Americans, while agreeing to the exchange of prisoners, must have consulted the Afghan government. And then that's why they were able to prevail upon the Afghan government to accept this. Although we all know Afghan government was not part of the peace talks and the peace agreement. So I think we have to decide first and foremost as to what do we want to achieve. Do we want to achieve peace or do we want to continue fighting?
Right. Now, this is an essential thing, Mr. Sarwan, coming back to you. The Loya Jirga, which was called in because President Ghani did not want to take his own decision on the remaining 400 Taliban prisoners. So over 3,000 people, as you know, gathered there, that put out a resolution. They said that we need peace. They said that if we have to release those prisoners for the sake of peace, we should do that. And then President Ghani has signed on that decree. And the Loya Jirga has also decided that peace talks, intra-Afghan dialogue will begin. So what I'm saying here is that this thing has advanced to a point where for anyone to think, as you were suggesting, that perhaps the Kabul government needs to be an equal partner is likely to derail the talks. And I don't think that that is going to redound to the advantage of Kabul.
Everything is unclear. There is nothing, no agenda yet for the government from the Taliban. The Afghan government face the group that they only believe on war, and they are thinking on the military winning.
The government is still thinking in terms of military winning?
No, I mean the group, the Taliban, they are still thinking on the military winning. And their commanders, when we go to the provinces, their commanders still have differences with their political wings in Qatar. And they think that they're from Afghanistan. So they can retake Afghanistan by force. That's why there's less reduction in violence yet. The violence increased if you compare it with last year and the previous year. So the groups still have no intentions to have a dialogue or intra-Afghan dialogue that's the way that people would like. Loya Jirga gave the suggestion to the government to release 400 remain prisoners of Taliban. But this is now international community that they have differences with the Afghan government. You clearly watched the France, that they released a statement and said that they demand Afghan government to not release those prisoners that they killed, French soldiers in Afghanistan, about the Australian and even US had the same thing, and some of the prisoners are in their blacklist. So now the people, the government, they have the intentions. But what the government really wants from the Taliban, from the US, and all those partners that they are engaged in peace process, to reduce the violence. If there's the violence going on, like right now it's going on, it's really tough for the Afghan government to negotiate.
Thank you. That was Rahimullah Sarwan speaking with us. Let me go back to Rahimullah Yusufzai here. Mr. Yusufzai, it seems to me that we are going round in circles. I will again press the point that if the US and its allies and the Kabul government had won on the ground, then there would have been no negotiations with the Taliban, but that has not happened. Now, the Taliban obviously are not going to relinquish violence until they have found more space for negotiating. It seems to me that there is some truth to the fact that Kabul might be dragging its feet and waiting for the next US presidential election. But I'll be surprised if Washington changes its policy or changes it in some way which is very different from how President Trump has approached it.
Ejaz, if you look at the record until now, when the peace talks started with the Americans, all the actions which caused delays or disputes were taken by the Afghan government. You know, they have been dragging their feet since long. It's not the first time. Why? Because they are going to lose. They will be the big losers. Because now this peace deal in Doha says that, you know, a new government will come up, which means the Ashraf Ghani government will have to go. And he will not accept that easily. He will try to delay the talks. Now, you know, look at this issue of Taliban prisoners. If the Americans had this list of 5,000 Taliban prisoners, and they had it for a long time, they could have shared it, and they must have shared it with their allies. You know, France, Australia, UK, whatever. And now, at the fag end, after the Doha agreement, and now that the prisoners are getting released and the IOJK has supported this, Ashraf Ghani has issued a decree. Now we hear France and Australia raising objections. France says several Taliban prisoners must not be released because they killed French soldiers. And Australia says one Taliban prisoner killed 3 Australians, he should not be released. Tell me, did these French and Australian soldiers come to fight in Afghanistan, or just for some seeking fun? They came there to fight, to kill and to get killed. And you know, some people were caught, they became prisoners of war. The French and the Americans and others also killed so many civilians and also so many Taliban. But I think that was war. And you could say these are war crimes. Why don't you set up, you know, a tribunal, and why don't you send these cases to, you know, the International Court of Justice?
This is a very, Rahimullah Sahab, a very important point that you've mentioned. I'm sorry I'm interjecting, but as you know, there are rights organizations who've actually said that there should be, inquiries into war crimes. But the problem is that it's not just one side. It's also US and its allies that are involved in such crimes, and then it would just open a Pandora's box. So I don't think even the United States is going to accept this. But thank you so much. That was Rahimullah Yusufzai speaking with us. I'm also joined by James Dorsey, who is an analyst and writer, joins me from Singapore. James, thank you for being on the program. NPR report about, some kind of sense, some analysts telling them that Kabul is kind of dragging its feet because it's thinking of or looking at the upcoming presidential election, and might think that in the event of former Vice President Joe Biden becoming the President of the United States, that somehow Washington's approach to Kabul government and Afghanistan will change. Other analysts, of course, disagree with that. What is your sense of it?
I think there's every reason to assume that the government in Kabul would want to buy time. I think we all can agree that President Trump's priorities in Afghanistan are not Afghanistan and its future, but the withdrawal of U.S. troops as quick as it can and an end to the American war in Afghanistan, certainly prior to the U.S. election. That's not a great negotiating or supporting position for the Kabul government in negotiations with the Taliban. That's not to say that those may not be priorities for a future President Biden if he were to win the election, but Biden certainly does not have an immediate election in front of him as these negotiations take place, and will be more concerned about America's place in the world than Trump is. So if you were the government in Kabul, indeed, you would want to push or stretch out the negotiation for another 3 to 4 months until you have clarity of what the situation is in Washington.
Okay, so, right, I get the broad point that you're making. But give me a sense of, let's assume, we're jumping ahead of the curve and it's a hypothetical. Let's assume that Joe Biden becomes the president. What kind of qualitative change do you think he would bring to the Afghanistan policy?
Well, let's keep in mind that, of course, he inherited the agreement as it was negotiated by the Trump administration with the Taliban.
Correct.
Whatever you think of that agreement, whether you think that is a strong agreement, whether you think that the Americans may have made, for their own opportunistic reasons, too many concessions to the Taliban, that is the agreement that Biden has to deal with. What the difference will be is that Biden's priorities, to some degree, will be different, and the pressures on him will be different from those on Trump. So the pressures on Trump today are elections, and whatever will feed the electorate and motivate them to vote for him, bringing American troops home, ending an endless war, obviously would be assets in that electoral fight.
No, but James, hold on. Let me hold you there. The way Trump operates, he could have very well turned the narrative around. I mean, for the elections, I mean, if I take your point with reference to the elections, he could have turned the narrative around and sold further war effort to the very public that he wants to get the votes from. So to me, it does not really seem to be an election ploy. I do think that for whatever reason, Trump does believe that the US has been there for a very long time and it is unlikely to go anywhere. You know, if we go back to the time of the Afghanistan policy review, the day he presented the review, he began by saying that my gut tells me to get out, but my generals are telling me that we should stay on.
I grant you that Trump basically can sell anything to his hardcore base. That's not the issue. The issue is that his electoral promise, and he's made, to be fair to him, a point of keeping his electoral promises, and to a large extent has done so. His electoral promise was to end the war. His electoral promise was to America first, to reduce at least America's military engagement overseas, including in Afghanistan, and to bring soldiers home. At no time is the ability to fulfill those promises more important than at a time of an American election, particularly one that is problematic in terms of Trump's prospects. Add to that the fact that simply Trump as a politician, as a person, his priorities are different. His priorities are his own advantage. What he cares about is what is right for him. And he defines what is right for him as being right for the country. So as a result, if that's your partner in negotiations, that's not the strongest partner you could have, because the objectives of the two partners in negotiation are very different.
Absolutely. I think that's a very interesting point. Very quickly, James, so this kind of boils down to the fact that even if the intra-Afghan dialogue starts end of this month, that it's going to drag on. And at some point, if Kabul gets a sense that Washington might be thinking of changing its policy, that they're going to put their foot down.
That's very well possible. There's also another dynamic here. With other words, if the government in Kabul's interest is to drag the negotiations out, the Taliban's interest is to push them forward as fast as they can.
Correct.
And they're a major player at the table. They're the other player at the table. And in some ways, there's a bit of irony in this. That is that Trump's priorities are, in that sense, maybe more aligned with those of the Taliban than those with the government in Kabul.
Thank you. That was James Dorsey talking to us. This is all from In Focus this week. We shall see you next Monday at the same time. Keep following us on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.